Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. Picture an adversary of such immense size and menace that even Moses, the prophet handpicked by God, required encouragement from above to keep from succumbing to fear. This foe possessed a name, a throne, and a family tree that stretched back to the most dreaded giants mentioned in the Bible. His name was Og, King of Bashan, a descendant of the Rephaim, a race steeped in mystery and terror. Few are aware of the true history of this imposing monarch, whose very presence could make even the most courageous hearts tremble. But today, you'll discover why the battle against him wasn't just a physical one, but a spiritual one as well. Prepare to delve into the dark secret behind the Old Testament's last giant. From the most ancient boundaries of sacred history, one name echoes through the accounts of the Old Testament as a symbol of overwhelming power and supernatural threat: Og. His name, which in Hebrew translates to gigantic, isn't simply a figurative expression, it's a literal description of the creature he was. Og wasn't just any king. He was the ruler of the Amorites, a formidable people who dwelled in the lands of Canaan, a group already mentioned in Scripture since the time of the patriarchs. Og stood out not just for his political authority, but for the heritage he carried in his very flesh and blood, descent from the Rephaim, the ancient lineage of giants that roamed the earth in eras predating the promises given to Abraham. His very existence was a testament to what Scripture describes as a struggle between men and beings whose origins were rooted in the mysteries of the earliest times. But this colossus's destiny wouldn't be one of glory. His downfall, precisely recorded in the sacred texts, took place in Edrei, a desolate location weighed down by the silence of the desert. Many scholars place the city in modern-day Dara, Syria. It was there that the army of Israel, under Moses' leadership, confronted Og and his warriors. This was no ordinary battle because the human heart quivers at such a sight. Something more than mere courage was needed. The certainty of divine presence was essential. Not by chance, Moses himself heard the words from the Lord, words that sustain even the weakest of warriors: "Do not fear." Yet the figure of Og didn't disappear with his defeat. His shadow loomed over the memory of nations, preserved not only in biblical tradition, but also in literature and imagination through the centuries. John Milton, in his timeless epic Paradise Lost, revived his image and intertwined it with the Nephilim, the giants born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, described in the opening chapters of Genesis. There, Og's name gained new strength, almost like a distant echo reminding humanity of the presence of beings who transcended the limits of mortal flesh. The chronological record of Scripture takes us to around 1440 BC, when Moses was leading Israel toward the Promised Land. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people deeply influenced by the cultures of Mesopotamia and Canaan, already possessed fortified cities and a well-established military tradition. Yet no warrior among them could compare to their king. Og was the very embodiment of threat, a giant among men, a sovereign who carried within himself the weight of antiquity and the strength of generations of warriors. Intriguingly, his memory also transcended religious boundaries. Islamic tradition mentions him, describing him as a man nearly 13 feet tall. Thus, his presence isn't limited to the pages of the Bible. It extends to the Quran as well, revealing how his figure was etched into different cultures, as if erasing him from human history were impossible. And if any heart still doubted his stature, the testimony of Scripture is striking. In Deuteronomy 3 verse 11, we find the account of his iron bed, a detail that transcends mere archaeological record. It measured 9 cubits in length by 4 in width, dimensions that, in our modern measurements, ranged from about 13.8 to 14.8 feet long and about 5.9 feet wide. A bed of titanic proportions, which not only supported a body of extraordinary size, but also symbolized the grandeur of a threat that God himself had to confront through his people. Faced with this, it's not hard to imagine the Israelites' astonishment as they gazed upon the enemy, a man who seemed closer to legend than reality, a presence so immense it made even the bravest warriors tremble. A king whose very bed became an eternal testimony to his greatness and whose fall, inevitable before the power of the Almighty, became an unforgettable milestone in the history of Israel. Among the many giants mentioned in Scripture, few, if any, compare to Og in terms of stature. He wasn't merely a king among men. He was a remnant of a forgotten era, an echo of the ancient, pre-Diluvian powers when giants still walked the earth and defied divine plans. The Bible reveals that Og belonged to a people shrouded in shadows and fear, the Rephaim. This name appears in several passages, such as Deuteronomy 3 and Genesis 14, always associated with an ancient and threatening lineage, a race of giants whose existence seemed to defy the limits of human understanding. The Rephaim were great not only in stature, but also in mystery. They were regarded as almost mythological creatures, monstrous in appearance and strength, dwellers of a forgotten age prior to the order we know today. But there's something even more disturbing behind that name. Rephaim in Hebrew literally carries the meaning of the dead, or, in some interpretations, the walking dead. This unsettling term refers to the ancient belief that these giants had been destroyed by the flood, swept from the face of the earth by the fury of the waters as divine punishment for their corruption. And yet they returned. They reappeared. They persisted even when they should have vanished. For that reason, they came to be seen as the dead still walking, living relics of a judgment that wasn't complete, cursed survivors of an age that God had sought to erase. And the King of Bashan is presented in Scripture as one of the last representatives of this extinguished lineage, a living echo of a generation of giants that seemed to have been wiped away from the plans of the Most High. His dominion over the Amorites, descendants of Canaan, wasn't merely political, it was symbolic. It was as though, behind his throne, an older, almost primal force was hiding, resisting the advance of the divine plan. Already in the days of Abraham, the Rephaim were in decline. They became increasingly rare, their presence isolated in valleys and mountains. Yet, even near extinction, they still inspired fear. And in the days of Moses, only a few remained. Among those few, Og stood out as a true living relic of the age of the Titans. His name appears shrouded in mystery, not only in Scripture, but also in extra-biblical documents. Among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, there's mention of an apocryphal text of immense curiosity, the Book of Og, King of the Rephaim Giants. Though fragmentary and surrounded by uncertainty, its content suggests that the story of Og is far older and darker than one might imagine. And ancient Jewish traditions deepen this enigma even further. In some legends preserved by rabbinic tradition, Og is described as a survivor of the flood itself. According to the renowned Rabbi Rashi, Og pleaded with Noah to be saved, clinging to the ark during the divine storm. In compassion, Noah permitted his survival, not inside the ark, but outside, where Og would hold on, being fed through an opening while the waters swallowed the world. This story, though non-canonical, is repeated in other Jewish traditions. Og, the giant, was said to have lived for thousands of years, spanning ages and witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, a being almost immortal whose life extended into the days of Moses, a warrior far too ancient to still be alive, yet far too powerful to be ignored. The image that emerges is of a monumental figure, not only in stature, but in meaning. Og wasn't merely a king. He was a presence that defied time, a living witness to past judgments and a threat to the fulfillment of God's purpose on earth, a vestige of a world God had already tried to destroy, and that still stubbornly persisted. In the legendary Book of Og, whose existence is mentioned among the mysterious fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's an account that defies every known natural law. Og was said to have lived for about 3,000 years, traversing ages and civilizations from the antediluvian world up to the days of Moses. According to this enigmatic text, when the waters of the flood began to engulf the earth, Og climbed the highest mountain in the region, a desperate attempt to escape divine judgment. But the waters didn't stop. They kept rising, and they rose beyond the mountains. Then, with a resilience no man could match, the giant swam among the waves, clinging to massive floating cedar logs, surviving the cataclysm for countless days, without food, without water, sustained only by an ancestral force many believe to have been supernatural. Some scholars have compared his endurance to the hibernation of bears, suggesting that Og, as a creature outside the norm, might have entered a vital stupor, surviving for long stretches under extreme conditions. Yet another version, even more astonishing, is preserved in ancient esoteric traditions. Og, foreseeing the disaster, was said to have built his own ark, not a replica of Noah's vessel, but a colossal structure proportional to his size and strength. With the immense trees of the forests of Bashan, whose cedars were renowned for their hardness and durability, he's said to have fashioned a ship capable of housing not only himself, but also other giants and various animals that inhabited that fertile land. An ark of titans, crafted by giant hands, sailing alone over divine judgment. But the mysteries don't end there. There are even darker traditions that challenge known chronology and biology. Some ancient Jewish texts and mystical interpretations claim that Og hadn't even lived before the flood, but was born after that cataclysmic event, the result of an unholy union between a fallen angel, one of the watchers cast from heaven, and a human woman. Other versions of this tradition affirm that his origin was linked to a demon who united with a pagan priestess, giving rise to a hybrid being, both powerful and cursed. This theory finds an echo in Genesis 6, which mentions the presence of the Nephilim both before and after the flood, a subtle yet disturbing clue that the blood of the giants continued to flow in later ages. According to these beliefs, Og wasn't merely a survivor. He was the resurgence, a new generation of giants, direct descendants of the rebellious spiritual forces that once sought to corrupt creation. A being whose very birth was a challenge to the divine plan, and who, for that reason, was allowed to exist only until the appointed time when he would be confronted by the chosen people. His throne was established in Bashan, a land of abundance and beauty whose fertile fields and lush forests stood in stark contrast to the dark spirit of its king. Bashan was rich, ideal for shepherding, and famous for its herds and for the vast natural resources that sustained the region. The cedars of Bashan, in particular, were highly valued, used in noble constructions and even in religious rituals. The first biblical mention of Og, or at least of his people, appears in Genesis 14 verse 5, when King Kedorlaomer of Elam, allied with other powerful kings, waged a brutal war against the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Karnaim, the place where Og may have resided. This episode, often overlooked in common readings, is, in fact, a key to understanding the antiquity and might of the giants' lineage. Ashtaroth-Karnaim, also called Ashtaroth-Serim or simply Karnaim, is a city mentioned in the Old Testament and located in a strategic region at the crossroads of what are today Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and parts of Syria. It was a city of considerable importance, and under Og's dominion, it became a fortress of resistance against the will of God. There, in the heart of a land that prospered under the command of a giant, history was being shaped. For although Bashan was fertile, beautiful, and productive, its leadership represented everything that had been condemned in the ancient world. And for that reason, it would become the stage for one of the greatest confrontations between heaven and flesh. When the people of Israel, guided by the firm hand of Moses, advanced toward the promised land, they encountered a formidable obstacle: Bashan, the fertile and imposing kingdom ruled by Og, the last of the Rephaim giants. And it was there, among the green hills and vast fields of the land of giants, that history would change course. The king of Bashan didn't bow before the Israelite advance. Instead, he rose to battle, determined to prevent the fulfillment of the promises made by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand, along with all his people and his land." Numbers 21:34. The battle was fierce, but swift, as recorded in Numbers 21:34-35 and expanded in Deuteronomy 3 verses 1-7. Og was utterly defeated, along with his armies and fortified cities. The last of the Rephaim had fallen, and with him, an age came to an end. Ashtaroth-Karnaim, once a symbol of Bashan's greatness, passed into Israelite control. Though the city is mentioned in Scripture only as part of the conquered territories, its importance was strategic. By being annexed, it opened the way for complete control of Bashan and reinforced Israel's presence east of the Jordan. Bashan was vast and rich. It stretched from the southern reaches of Gilead to the snowy heights of Mount Hermon, and from the Jordan River in the west to the eastern frontiers of Syria, a generous land with fertile soil, abundant pastures, and forests filled with oaks and cedars. After the victory, this region was granted by God to the half-tribe of Manasseh, as described in Joshua 13 verses 29-31. It was the fulfillment of a promise, the materialization of the covenant made between heaven and a people once wandering in the desert. Among the cities of Bashan, Golan gained prominence. Chosen as one of the cities of refuge, sacred places where those accused of involuntary manslaughter could take shelter, Golan was designated as a symbol of justice and mercy, as seen in Joshua 21 verse 27. Meanwhile, Argob, another city in the region, became one of the important administrative districts under Solomon's reign, mentioned in 1 Kings 4 verse 13. Thus, the dominion of Bashan was consolidated and transformed from a land of giants into a land of divine justice and administration. Another territory belonging to the extinct reign of Og was Arab, a region equally fertile, whose pastures served livestock and whose natural wealth contributed to the prosperity of the nation. After the giants' defeat, Arab was incorporated into the tribal lands of Manasseh and Gad and became part of the new map of the Promised Land, according to the division ordered by Moses and later recorded in the historical books of the Bible. Even after that glorious conquest, Bashan continued to be the stage for disputes. During the reign of the wicked Hazael, king of Syria, part of the cities of Bashan were temporarily seized, as recorded in 2 Kings 10 verses 32 to 33. But the victory of the enemies wouldn't last. King Jehoash, according to the prophetic word of Elisha, reconquered the lost cities, restoring the territory once again to Israelite control. 2 Kings 13 verse 25. The prophecy was fulfilled, and with it, once more, the faithfulness of God was revealed before his people. As time passed, Bashan began to fade from the great records of history, but its memory remained. The prophets and psalmists continued to mention its riches. Its vast pastures, ideal for wild cattle, are remembered in Ezekiel 39 verse 18 and Psalm 22 verse 12. Its majestic oaks are cited in Isaiah 2 verse 13 and Ezekiel 27 verse 6, while its beauty and abundance are evoked in the oracles of Amos 4 verse 1 and Jeremiah 50 verse 19. Even when forgotten by men, Bashan remained alive in the memory of God and his prophets. After the exile, the entire region east of the Jordan came to be generally called Gilead, a name that encompassed the territory once known as Bashan. Already divided and reorganized, Bashan was separated into 4 main districts: Golan, in the region of the famous hills that still bear that name today; Horan, mentioned in Ezekiel 47 verse 16 as a city or border district; Argob, the former administrative center; and Battania, the name by which Bashan was later known in Greco-Roman sources. Thus, the land of the last giant was completely transformed. What once was a symbol of resistance against the divine purpose became part of Israel's legacy. Bashan, once the throne of Og, became pasture land for shepherds, a city of refuge, a dwelling place for prophets, and a setting for fulfilled promises. According to some ancient traditions, it wasn't Moses who struck the final blow against Og, but Joshua, the brave warrior who would succeed Moses as leader of Israel. These traditions affirm that, armed with a spear, Joshua faced the giant of Bashan face to face and slew him, bringing to an end an ancestral lineage that defied divine plans. But regardless of who wielded the weapon of victory, the fact remains undeniable. Og was but one among many giants that Israel had to confront when entering the Promised Land. Canaan was, indeed, a land of promises, but also of dangers. It was inhabited by mighty peoples, fortified cities, and beings who seemed shaped from the very nightmares of the ancients. And among all those colossal enemies, Og stood apart. Standing nearly 15 feet tall and over 6.5 feet wide, his presence was overwhelming, a creature of flesh and blood, but of proportions almost mythical. Facing Og was like challenging a living mountain, a being whose very existence traced back to the corrupted origins of the world. His body was a fortress, his arms like the trunks of oaks, his voice likely thundered across the valleys of Bashan. A monster. That's what he appeared to be. Not a mere king, but a living reminder of an age god had decided to erase with the waters of the flood, yet one that somehow still resisted. And yet Og fell. For no matter how great the giant, no enemy is invincible before the will of the Most High. No wall stands when God has decreed victory for his people. Og was the last of the Rephaim. With his fall, not only was a battle won, an entire age came to an end, an age of shadows buried by the light of the promise. I hope you all enjoyed another episode of our series on the giants of Scripture. I thank you from the heart for following us this far. May you remain under the protection of God. See you soon.